millennia, and of course it continues to be so today. And it's this legacy that we continue to build on here at the library with tonight's event. So good evening, and thank you to everybody for joining us for the inaugural session of our Living Collection series, The Music of Luke Styles. Tonight's not just a concert, it's a celebration of how creative work becomes part of our nation's story and our cultural heritage. How preserving the works of prominent Australian artists, be it music, poetry, art, writing, more, allows future generations to explore, reimagine and engage with the art in a myriad of ways. We're really honoured to have renowned composer Luke Styles with us this evening, alongside esteemed choral director Tobias Cole and an ensemble of skilled performers who'll bring Luke's work alive for us this evening. Luke has achieved international acclaim during his career as a composer. He's composed 8 operas for key houses and festivals. He's had numerous prestige residencies and wide-ranging performances of his very, very large oeuvre. By entrusting his personal papers to the National Library, Luke has ensured that this body of creative works are preserved, can be studied and provide endless inspiration for generations to come. And as a composer placing his papers with us, Luke joins a long list of very distinguished Australian composers who have chosen to entrust all of their works to this library. Luke's collection is comprised of manuscripts, scores, concert programs, photographs and article. And the collection not only celebrates his musical expertise, but also highlights the creative process, the artistic decisions, the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of decisions that have to be made by an artist, and the inspired thinking that frames his final works. This aligns perfectly with the concept of our new series, Living Collection, exploring the collection as a living archive where works can continue to evolve, invite new interpretations and maintain their presence within our cultural landscape. A moment to honour the art of Australia's greats, to see and experience their work with fresh perspectives and to connect more deeply with the material. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to hand the baton to Luke and Tobias to conduct this special event. Please join me in welcoming Luke and Tobias.
Thank you. So I'm Tobias and this is Luke, and it's been a great honour to be involved in this project where we'll explain how it all got started a little later. But what I'm here to do is to try to tease out of Luke some of those secrets that singers and performers of a composer's work sort of want to know. Why did they make us work so hard, or how, what's behind that moment, that brilliant moment, and that's hopefully what we'll get today. But what I'd ask you to do is to think of maybe a question, maybe not all of you, but at the end we'll have some questions. I'll invite Luke.
Right. Got to see it. Yes, it's on now, I think. There we go. Oh my goodness.
Oh, there you are. Wow.
Well, I don't have to project.
Thank you for that introduction, Tobias, and it's lovely to be here this evening with you all. Thank you for coming, and thank you for the wonderful performance of Ferrari Mountain that kicked off tonight's proceedings. I'll talk a little bit about writing for young people in a moment.
So, Luke, I'm fascinated by a composer's background. Why, every good musician should be writing music from when they start learning their instruments, their first instruments, or when they
they start singing. But those who continue to write, after those early stages, it's a discipline, getting up in the morning and writing. But what's your background? Where did you start? What school did you go to? Was it a private school?
No, it wasn't. I'll give you a bit of my background then. So I was born in Brisbane and moved to Sydney within a couple of weeks of being born, and was raised in Sydney. I went to Newtown High School of the Performing Arts, and there's some Newtown alumni here. It was a real formative, as you can imagine, experience, secondary school anyway, but particularly Newtown. I was there as a flute player. That was my first instrument. But I was also very much involved in the drama department, and that really feeds into why I write operas and theatrical works. So the slide, I'm going to show a few slides along the way. I was in a film called Dark City, which was filmed at Fox Studios and had William Hurt and Kiefer Sutherland in it. So I was doing a lot of acting when I was a kid. I was also in a lot of plays at school. So this is me with Virginia Gay, who is in Calamity Jane at the Opera House at the moment, and Douglas Hansel, who's also quite prominent as an actor here in Australia. So there was a really high standard of students, basically, in the drama department, in the music department, and I really learnt just as much from those other students and friends as I did from the teachers, who were also brilliant. And then after school, I went straight to the UK to study at the Royal Academy of Music and did my undergraduate there. Then went to Vienna and did 2 years in Vienna as a postgrad, and then Germany and did 2 years as a postgrad in Germany, and then back to the UK for another postgrad. And so lots of study. It was mainly to spend time with specific teachers. So Detlev Müller-Siemens was my teacher in Vienna, and he was a student of Ligeti and Messiaen. In Germany, it was Wolfgang Riem. And then back in the UK, George Benjamin. And George was also a student of Messiaen's at the same time as Detlev, so there was this crossover. And then really what's punctuated my career after studying has been a series of residencies. So starting at Aldeburgh, doing a opera writing residency in 2010-11. Then I was Glyndebourne's first young composer in residence. That was very formative. Foundling Museum, writing works for young people there. And yeah, that's been the early career. We will have questions at the end, so I'm rattling through it a little bit quickly, but we will have plenty of chances for questions.
Lovely, Luke. Well, we're here at the library because there was a point in your career where was it someone suggested that you make a collaboration, or you speak to the library about storing your work?
That's right. Yeah, so I was in touch with a man called Shane Simpson, and I'm pretty sure he was on the board or is on the board, still on the board here. And he was a kind of entertainment or music lawyer and also a philanthropist. And he was saying that the library is starting to acquire the collections of composers, and why don't you have a chat to them? And so we had a chat, and I sent my work to the acquisitions teams. And yeah, they were interested in acquiring it. And it's really a safe place to house manuscripts. I was having to transport them, to different places where I was living, and there was the chance they could get damaged. So having a safe place for them to be housed was one reason to bring them here. Another was so that they would be open for research, and for events like this, that they could come to life in performance and conversation. There's a real prestige with having the works here as well. I mean, I'm very proud when I tell people that there's a collection here, so it's a real honor to have the works here. The slides here are of some of the works we're about to hear. So it's mainly my handwritten manuscripts that the library has. And personally, when I study composers' works, seeing actually their marks on the page can be really informative to the kind of the gesture in which they're composing or the energy that they might be bringing to writing. There's also as you can see here, a lot of the text that I've used in my works and how I've underlined it and what bits I'm drawing out. So those bits and pieces are there, notations on bits of text. Yeah, and this is the first piece we heard up in the foyer. Toby, a question for you, because this is an in conversation. Why don't you tell people how we started working together? Because this has been quite a collaborative journey to make this event together.
Well, I was aware of Luke's music for a while. I have been aware of your music for a while, but we'd never made the contact. And then Sydney Chamber Opera presented a work of Luke's a few years ago in 2022, I think. And I was collaborating with Sydney Chamber Opera at the time on another project, and I had a chance to go and see Luke's work there. And it really resonated with me because it was a piece that was partnered with Benjamin Britten's Canticles, and Benjamin Britten is a composer that I am especially fond of. And we didn't meet each other then, but then through Jack Simmons, who is the director of Sydney Chamber Opera, I think Jack gave Luke my number, and we met in Smith's Alternative and talked about all of the connections that really we have. So how Luke obviously has worked with Benjamin Britten's the Britten Peers Foundation, but also written for countertenor, and I think is writing an opera, has an opera in development with a countertenor in it, and then all this children's music, and hearing the background to the children's music. So this was a commission by the Britten Peers Foundation, sort of looking at Britten's works for children, which he wrote when his brother was a headmaster at a prep school, and said, "Ben, we need music on a Friday afternoon. Give us something." And he did. He wrote, I think, about 11 pieces. And some people in the room would be very familiar with some of them. Cuckoo, Old Abram Brown is dead and gone. You'll never see him more. And they're great pieces that people of all ages can get into. And then the Britten Peers Foundation commissioned many composers to write a sort of more contemporary set for children of today. And Luke, I think, wrote about 10 or 11.
Yeah, that's right. So the project that the Opera Festival had was called Friday Afternoons, as Toby said, after the set of songs that Britten wrote for his brother's school. And they commissioned Jonathan Dove to write a set. Then they commissioned Nico Mooley to write a set, and then me to write a set, and then Erilyn Wallen to write a set. And then they've just been commissioning individual composers to write singular songs. So I was lucky enough to write a set of, I think it's 10 songs. I do have the score here. Some of these things haven't ended up in the archive. I've hung on to a few things. But they can have it in the next lot. I think I wrote 10 or so, and then we did workshops around the UK getting young people to write their own songs. So to work with a librettist to write the words, so the same librettist that wrote the words for my songs. And I worked with the young people and the librettist to kind of generate music together. I think this might even be one of those sheets that was from the workshops with the kids, where they'd come up with words, and then we were kind of clapping rhythms to those words and then starting to put some pitch to it. And then I went away and took the little fragments that they had composed together with me into a more formalized song. They're probably the weirdest songs in the set. The songs that they kind of helped me with, or that co-wrote, Survival Party in Sector 0000000017, which is a space song, and also The Surprising Scary Horror of the Cafe, the Castle, and the Jungle. So that was the other one. But I think the kind of silliness, the absurdity, the playfulness underpins all of my work with young people. I think it's quite important not to make assumptions as an older person about what would interest someone who's 8, 9, or 13, or 18. So those workshops that Albra facilitated with the young people really helped us not to make those assumptions, not to write too many pieces about doing homework, although there is a homework one in there. They're also seasonal, the Friday afternoon songs. So we have a Valentine song, there's an Easter song, there's a Halloween song. So the librettist, Alan McKendrick, and I were thinking, oh, that's great. If we write an Easter one, all the schools can do this song at Easter. It hasn't quite worked out like that, but they have been performed a few times, which is good. We're pretty much ready for the next bit of music, I think. Before the choir comes down, just a little bit about the format. We will do a bit of chat in between each musical performance. So next we've got the choir performing 3 of the Friday afternoon songs. Then we'll talk a little bit more, and we'll have a performance of some chamber music for violin and viola. Then a bit more chat. Then Vanity, which is a big work for female choir, tenor, bass, and violin. And then we'll have chat at the end with time for questions.
Lovely.
So,
Great.
okay. So there we are.
Shall we have the children's choir come and join us? Thank you. And in the flavour of Friday afternoons, one of the choir, as you'll see on the slide, is called vocal fry. Now, vocal fry is an extended vocal technique where we do this. A certain Prime Minister was an expert at that. And we fry the vocal cords. Well, I promise you, parents, that's not what I do. But we had to come up with a name for a group that meets on Friday afternoons.
Santa Claus lives at the North Pole with all his elves, sure. But where does the Easter Bunny live? Where? Where? or twice, followed by 10 days of fireworks, enough to make your mind lurch and upset the whole universe. But please don't disturb me in my tent. You can whack, whack, whack. 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 Every drum, every drum, every drum, every drum. Triple fire, every gun. Set fire to the dying garden in a fit of terrible arson. And push everybody in town. Fast forward, all nervous breakdown. With your noise, 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 noise. We're gonna lose set, 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 noise. That's fine. I don't mind it. It's nice. But please don't disturb me in my tent. I got some things to do in here, you see. I've got some things to do. A tattoo of Spider-Man, not a real one, no, not till you're 18. A tattoo of it, not a real one, no, not till you're 18. Of a dinosaur, not a real one, no, not till you're 18. A tattoo of a unicorn, not a real one, no, not till you're 18. Of a motorbike, of a motorbike, of a motorbike, 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 not a real one, no, not till you're 18. A tattoo of a spaceship, not a real one, no, not till you're 18. A flaming skull of a flaming skull of a flaming skull, not a real one, no, not till you're 18. Say, Mom and Dad, oh, go on then, a real one, sure, why not, why not?
Well, thank you to the Canberra Children's Choir and to Vocal Fry and to Toby. You were wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Toby, I wanted to start by asking you a question for this section of our conversation. Tell us about the work that you do with young people. We've just seen you conduct 2 youth choirs. Tell us about how you go about working with them.
Well, I think I communicate well with young people, although I've got a lot of very young choristers in the space here who are probably thinking, well, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever. I particularly enjoy that collaboration with young people because there is often there aren't those the boundaries that they think they can't do it. They oh no, 7/8, what's that? You have this opportunity to teach some complicated but interesting things without resistance, and also it is so wonderful to share the joy, the love of music with young people, and to try and ignite that joy in them, and that curiosity to want more. So I think it's those things which are the main things that inspire me. And I had wonderful teachers when I was young, and hark back to those experiences.
Was it part of your training, working with young choirs?
Not so much my training, although official training, but I was encouraged to take choir rehearsals when I was in high school, and that was something I very much enjoyed and was drawn to.
How did you go about teaching the young people these songs?
Well, I think the words were a great key to it, and it's interesting when a new genre comes to me, and I kind of go, oh, yes, of course, this is an opportunity to teach from this angle. And I think with your music, Luke, we'll get onto this, but as into why, but the words are rhetorical, and you want to sort of shout them at times, and giving the children permission to just almost shout. I mean, to sing noise, noise, noise upstairs in a rehearsal at the library was fantastic. Stamping their feet and it's great to give the children that opportunity. So just earlier this year, the children's choir sang in an opera with Opera Australia, and they had that opportunity of singing with big voices, and they really had to belt it out. Opera's this interesting thing.
I think that thing about enabling young people to be kids and to be wild is really part of what I've enjoyed about writing for young people, especially in institutions like the Aldeburgh Festival, Britain Fears Foundation, that does have a level of prestige and stuffiness to it and a perceived way of singing, to kind of break that and enable kids to shout and clap and stamp and to sing about silly things. I mean, one of the songs we performed in a London school, and there was a wildness and a rawness to it, which was far more interesting than the choir. I mean, they were great, who did the premiere, who were a private school and incredibly polished and beautiful and very crisp. The kind of wildness and the connection with the words was much more immediate with this other school, who had helped write the song, so I guess that was there, but didn't have all of that backlog of perceived ways of singing. And that's what I try and do when I write with young people, is to tap into what makes it exciting to be a young person.
Yes, I think that's really the key thing for these children to see what's possible with singing. Is what is music? We define it. They're teachers, they're music teachers, so they can take a phrase and really let it go. And I remember reading about how Benjamin Britten would sort of secretly prefer the Danish, the Copenhagen boys choir singing, his Ceremony of Carols than the English choirs. And I think it was just, there was something a bit more raw in their sound or something that was appealing.
Yeah.
So yes, the choir tradition, certainly in England, is fantastic, and having kids sing.
You do have that in Britain's work. So I've written 2 youth operas, and the second one is a sci-fi youth opera. And it came about because I was looking at the Britain archive and saw that Britain and the librettist for Gloriana, I've forgotten his name. Anyway, it'll come to me later. They started work on an opera called Tycho the Vegan, and this was to be a sci-fi youth opera. And I thought if Britain was going to write a sci-fi youth opera about Tycho the Vegan, then maybe I should check it out. And there's about a 10-page prologue that exists in the archives there. And that project was interrupted by the Gloriana Commission. It was William Plomer was the librettist for that. So they abandoned it. Tycho the Vegan later became Curlew River, so it had all of this stuff about Japanese no theatre in there, and it was very stylized and ritualized, even this little prologue. And that kind of all filtered into my youth opera, which is about the moon being a recording device of every word ever spoken on Earth, but only children can mine the moon rocks and listen to these conversations, and they're sent to the moon by kind of an evil, I don't know, she's a kind of fascist woman who sends them to the moon to mine it, looking for the first word ever spoken. And these ideas came from the young people, a kind of fear of observance technology. I wrote it in 2013, and so even back then, the young people were very worried about this. And this is all in the archive as well. So I've got the bits and pieces of the Britten and Plomer prologue, and then the research that I did around that, the sketches of Tycho's dream, and the video of it as well is in the archive. So that's all there to look up.
Wonderful, Luke. We've been talking a lot about your vocal music, of course, but you weren't a singer at school, were you? You were an instrumentalist originally?
Yeah. So I went to Newtown as a flute player, and then took up the electric bass and then the double bass, so a bit of a change for a few different reasons. Yeah.
And then your interest in instrumental writing. We're going to hear soon some pieces for violin and viola, and how did these come about?
Well, I think writing instrumental music, and particularly instrumental chamber music, is a way of focusing your attention as a composer to the really core musical elements. So when I'm writing chamber music, it's thinking about harmony and rhythm and sustaining a duration, essentially, in a way that is very different from when you have a text which supplies a structure, or where you need to serve a meaning or follow some kind of a narrative in some way. Instrumental music needs to propel itself without those things, by and large. So that's really what's coming out in each of my pieces of kind of instrumental chamber music. And I'd say writing chamber music for strings is the most prolific part of that catalogue.
Right, and we're about to hear 2 pieces. Where do they come in your oeuvre, your composing life?
So the one up here is a sketch for Slogan 1. So there are 4 pieces called Slogan that I have. This was the first one, and each of them take the same structure. So they have a fast part, an A section, and a slower part, a B section. This one in particular is about exploring harmony in both its kind of vertical form, so chords essentially that are heard as a vertical, and then spreading that to a horizontal expression of harmony. So be it chords, or be it scales or little repeated motifs, and how they line up in different ways. I was in 2009 is when I wrote this, and I was looking a lot at set class theory, which some of you will know is a way of ordering intervals and creating small cells that build and give a structure to your harmony. And that is borne out in Slogan 1. The other work is Bound, and that's here. That was a commission for the 200th anniversary of the Royal Academy of Music, and it's probably one of the most recent works in the catalogue. It's from 2019, and it's a violin solo.
Lovely. Well, I think there are some string players
Yeah,
backstage.
I think
so
we'll move
shall we
on
hear?
to the next performance part. Okay. Thank you, Brad and Pippa. That was great.
Yes.
I forgot to ask you, Toby, tell me what you play, because playing an instrument makes an impact in your work as a conductor and a singer, doesn't it?
My main instrument was viola, and
Okay.
so it was lovely to just see Pippa mastering the instrument. And who would pick up the viola but Bach and Handel? But it's that was my main instrument, and I'm sure that had an impact on my singing and decision to be a countertenor. But the other instrument, of course, was piano, which we had to learn, and recorder was our. Yeah.
And you were telling me that recorder plays a part in some of the rehearsing you do.
Yes. So all the kids have a recorder, and
Why do you do that?
well, I must say in the last 3 weeks we haven't been pulling it out because we've been learning this hard music by Luke Stiles. But it's why learn the recorder? Well, the lovely thing about the recorder, of course, is it's the lightest instrument, the most easily transportable instrument, the cheapest. If you get the Yamaha plastic ones, and the descant recorder, though it sounds an octave higher, it reads the notes which are basically the range of a treble voice. So you can say, okay, well, now play the phrase that you just sang, or sing the phrase that we just played on the recorder, and they can do that. So it's a great instrument. Just have it, in your bag and pull it out and play away.
Yeah.
So I was going to say that vocal music. Coming back to that, it's been. Why is it so important in your career?
Yeah, I would say vocal music makes up the largest portion of the collection, and the pieces that you're going to see kind of behind us are the handwritten manuscript or sketches of Vanity, which we'll hear in a minute. And I guess vocal music is for two reasons. I guess I read text and I hear vocal music, so that's one reason. I think if you're hearing it, then that compels you as a composer to write it down. The other thing is I just love the sound of the human voice. It is, our bodies made musical, and just a beautiful melody I'm always drawn to, whether it's in Luigi Nono's music or Verdi or Britten. Just a phrase that is incredibly exquisite and expressive just brings me back to it all the time. And then I guess the other aspect of vocal music is opera, and even non-operatic works that are inherently theatrical. I think all acts of playing music are theatrical. What we just saw was a theatrical act, even though there was no explicit kind of narrative or anything like that. It's standing up and playing an instrument is a physical action, a theatrical action, as well as a physical action. But when you put text in there, you start to get narrative and you start to get character, and then the complexity of then adding music to that and staging is just, an exciting thing. It's the Gesamtkunstwerk. It's what kind of as artists, I think, we want to sometimes go bigger and bigger and bigger and try and put everything into our expression. So hence vocal works.
And of course, the words are very important, the selection of narrative and ultimately the librettist you use. But do you want to talk about themes, Australian themes that you're drawn to?
Certainly. So there's some large vocal works in the collection One of them is, well, I've written a series of kind of larger scale vocal works, song cycles, oratorios, symphonic song cycle. The first was probably On Bunya with a text by Les Murray. I'm just going to cough. Sorry. A text by Les Murray, the book of poetry by the same name, On Bunya. And that really explored the idea of a poet-farmer, a farmer in the Australian kind of outback, and expressing the kind of beauty of the landscape and also the work. And I think Les Murray does that throughout his output as a poet, but particularly in On Bunya, which is where he lived in the New South Wales countryside. And it was paired with some Vaughan Williams on Wenlock's Edge. So it's the same instrumentation as that, string quartet, piano, and tenor. And I wrote it for a very English tenor, Mark Padmore, and the Britten Symphonia. So Mark sung it with a very English accent, very kind of, a British presentation of it. But it has been done here in Australia as well by an Australian tenor at the Choriol Festival in Adelaide. And it was Michael Smallwood, and he really embraced all of the Australian kind of language in it. And this is something that we've talked about a little bit, working kind of my Australian accent into the setting of the text for a singer. And I actually came up against a lot of, this initiated a lot of conflict at Glyndebourne with the chorus master, being told that you couldn't set certain words a certain way. And if you tell that to a composer, it can be like a red rag to a bull. An example, it was basically the diphthongs. If you say sail, the way we might say it with our accent is 2 syllables, sail. But in kind of PR English, you would say sail.
Sail.
Sail, sail. So one syllable. Or fire would be fire instead of fire. And so
well, that's 3, fire.
Fire, yeah. So I had all of these 2-syllable settings of 1-syllable words, and we clashed quite a bit over that. He also conducted the premiere of Vanity, but anyway. But he's great, he's really good. But Michael Iron brought all of that Australianness out. The other big Australian work that's in the collection is No Friend But the Mountains, and that was premiered at the Sydney Maya Music Bowl in 2021 and sets text by Behrouz Bookhani from the book of the same name. And it really looks at Australian identity through the lens of Australia being a place of refuge for refugees, but throughout history, it's part of our story of coming to a place of sanctuary, but also Australia as a prison, both a kind of literal prison, being incarcerated, but a kind of an isolated prison where beauty emerges from that isolation. So the beauty of our native flora and fauna and our sky and our landscape being very different from that in the Northern Hemisphere. I feel that Behrouz captures all of those aspects when he's talking about the journey across the waves and when he arrives on Christmas Island, and as well as him being literally incarcerated on Manus. So that's a big vocal work. It was done in London at the Barbican with the LSO earlier this year, so it's had another outing, which has been great.
I was going to ask Luke about that, the English wanting to hear Australian stories. Do you find that they are wanting to hear them more, or have you had to sort of write to set Shakespeare, or
Oh, it's a good question. I think for me, I'm now English and Australian, so I became English in 2012 as well as being Australian. And there is, a duality to my identity. And I'd say that the works, On Bunya was commissioned in the UK, and it was the original pitch was to set Clive James poetry. But Clive
Another
James,
famous expat.
Well, much more famous in the UK than Les Murray is, and he wouldn't allow his poetry to be set to music, so that put an end to that. But we'd already gone down the path, so I think I got Les Murray in there by accident, really. No Friend But the Mountains was programmed at the Barbican because they wanted to put that piece on. And they didn't talk about the Australian aspect so much. It was more about the kind of international resonance of the refugee stories. Similar. Yeah, there are lots of those stories around the world at the moment. So Behrouz's story resonated. So it was that aspect of it that they really focused on. A lot of my works have been commissioned outside of Australia, even if they have an Australian theme. And that speaks to a wider kind of cultural trend, I would say.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Very encouraging. So coming to Vanity, how did that come about? How did you come to writing a work for such an interesting orchestration, a women's chorus and a tenor and bass soloist and violin?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I wrote it in 2012 while I was the composer in residence for Glyndebourne. And at the time, the men were doing Billy Budd. So Billy Budd is an opera by Benjamin Britten that has an all-male cast and a big chorus. So the chorus, all the men were busy and the women didn't really have anything to do. So the administration asked if I'd write something for the ladies of the chorus, which I did, and that's why Vanity has a female choir in it. But they also wanted me to give an opportunity to their young artists, and on their young artist program was a really good bass and a tenor. So there is a tenor and a bass soloist in this piece as well. And they suggested, standard piano accompaniment, but I was at that stage quite nervous about writing for piano. I'm not a piano player, really. I mean, I can play it, but not properly. Well, not very well. So I didn't want to write for piano, and I was getting quite interested in Baroque music. So I was more interested in a kind of continuo section and other accompaniment instruments like theorbos and lutes and viola da gambas. So I chose none of those. I chose a violin because it could be quite soloistic as well, but it was played by the leader of the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment, so it was played on a period instrument. So it does have that slight Baroque resonance, although I think probably can't hear that so much, but maybe in the relationship of kind of support and then solo playing, there's a little bit of that there.
And what about the choice of Shakespeare sonnets?
Yeah, well, I knew I was going to write an opera of Macbeth as the next thing I did for Glyndebourne, so I wanted to test out writing or setting Shakespeare, so that was one reason. There was also an article in The Guardian that had celebrities choosing their favourite Shakespeare sonnets, so Judi Dench had chosen hers and Stephen Fry and things like that. So I went to that list and basically used that as a short list and chose the ones that spoke to me, and chose one of the most famous ones, Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day? And just really connected to the language. I guess it was a bit brave to do as a 20-something-year-old to take on those sonnets, but I'm glad I did. I quite enjoyed it. Those were the thoughts behind it.
And the title Vanity.
Yes.
There is mention of vain in the last sonnet that we do. But do you want to elaborate on
Sure.
why?
So part of it is the setup, 2 men and a choir of women. So there's a kind of imbalance there. And the men are the soloists, so they're kind of they're the prima donnas of the situation, whereas you have a wiser group of society, let's say. In 2012, when I wrote it, it felt like male vanity was everywhere. There were a lot of men's grooming products that were on TV a bit. It was a period of, as I remember it, a lot of reality TV shows, the kind of Love Island type ones, where there was a lot of kind of male grooming and pruning and preening and peacocking around. And also being at Glyndebourne a lot with a lot of very highly strung men with lots of big egos. So there was a lot of male vanity around, I'd say.
Yes.
And so that's how I was reading these poems.
Lovely.
Yeah.
And how did the singers respond to
that subject matter?
To that,
or?
yeah. did the women enjoy this kind
Yeah,
of...
I don't think I said so much to the men. I think I spoke to the ladies of the chorus and to the chorus master about it, but not so much to the guys. I didn't have as many conversations. I think that it was a real challenge for the ladies of the chorus, and I think, as you'll hear, it's not an easy piece to sing. And, you know, with 13 years distance from having written it, it's quite an unusual experience going back to a piece. But it was certainly one of the largest vocal works I'd written, well, the largest vocal work I'd written at the time. So it started me down a specific path. Toby, tell me a bit about how you approach working with singers with text like Shakespeare's that is somewhat archaic.
I often use the iambic as a tool to make music move. So shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And it's that energy of always going from an upbeat to a down, and that's sort of what gets us kind of across the bar line, if you like. So, but then breaking it down to okay, well, that journey has, you know, vowels and consonants in the way, and often I find choristers, consonants, let's just quieten them and just forget they exist, and you know, and sort of maybe have this justification that consonants are, they're not music, they're percussion instruments, whereas you know, a beautifully sustained N or NG or a good, you know, clear ch consonant is delightful for colour. So I try and tease that out of singers.
And how about accent?
Well, accent, I suppose I have a pretty generic accent, although I do love exploring the diphthongs, and I love, you know, for instance, the journey of the vowel, or the vowel, it's the diphthong really, oh. So, oh no, oh love, and you know, the kind of the default for a chorister is to sing or, just or love. But there is so much to explore when you do have a diphthong, because of course as soon as you change a vowel, all the harmonics are doing amazing things above, and it's tickling everyone's ears. It really is. It's wonderful.
Yeah. And do you ever put an Australian accent into Australian works?
I tend not to. I find you know, the process of trying to get the voice sort of lifted can then all be kind of if it drops. But and then working on whether it's a you know, it's a kind of a really far you know, an extreme character of, you know, Australian sound. It's great. I use it actually as a tool in rehearsals to just take a bit of text and really give it an Australian twang, and see what it does, because it does really. People love it. Singers love it.
The only time I've really been able to embrace it is I wrote an opera about Ned Kelly, and the librettist was Peter Goldsworthy. And I had a chat with Peter yesterday because it was the anniversary of the dismissal, and we've been talking about a dismissal opera. But I can't convince him. But anyway, I was telling him about this today, and he said that he's donated his papers to the library as well, and that there is all of the correspondence we had about Ned Kelly. So there is this cross-reference between my archive and Peter's, which I think is quite interesting. And Peter wrote quite a lot of Australian accent into the libretto of Ned Kelly. We had a community chorus as the chorus, and they had a lot of rhyme that was particularly Australian. And Ned Ned, not so much, but there were some characters that had an Australian accent for sure, which was quite nice to bring that out. But it was a very Australian context. There was an Australian commission, an Australian librettist, composer, cast, so it resonated very much here. Yeah.
It's not really a significant part, I think, of an opera singer's training, that training in accent in English.
Yeah.
Of course, there's very good training on other languages, but the variation of in English, and in fact, it was interesting when we were doing A Midsummer Night's Dream with Australian Opera or Opera Australia that there was a push to have a language coach for the English, which was new at the time. So and having someone there to really work and tease out more of the pronunciation and really have the singers aware of what they're doing and what they instinctively do and being able to market in their score.
Yeah. Okay, I think we will move on to Vanity now.
Lovely.
So to just say before we hear it, it is in 4 movements, and you can see that behind me. There's 4 sonnets. I will click between the text of the sonnets as we go as well, so you can have the words to enjoy. So.
Lovely. Thank you.
possession thine. This were to be new. New made when thou art old. And see thy blood warm when thou feelest it cold. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a day. Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his cold complexion deemed, and every fair from fair sometimes declines by chance or nature's changing course untreed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou oldst, nor shall death brag thou wanderst in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growst. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Hast thou forged hooks? Falsehood hath forged the judgment of my heart is tied. Why should my heart think that a several plot, which my heart knows the wide world common place. Oh, mine eyes seeing this, say this is not to put fair truth upon so foul a that she might think me someone tutored you. Unlearned in the words for subtleties. Us vainly simply I credit her for speaking tongue.
On both sides is simple truth suppressed.
Wherefore says she
not, she is
wherefore
unjust.
says
Says she not, she is
wherefore
unjust. Says she not, she is unjust.
best habit
Well, another big thank you to Toby and to the choir and the soloists and Brad as well. Thank you so much for that. I also wanted to just say a quick thank you to everyone at the National Library of Australia, to Shannon and Kelly in particular, and Adam on the technical side. Thank you for putting this on. It's a great privilege and an honour, so thank you very much. And to Toby for all the rehearsing, Tobias, sorry, for all the rehearsing and bringing all the musicians together. It's really wonderful. In this last section, we wanted to leave time for questions if people have them. So I don't think there's a great... Did you want to ask anything, Toby, before we get on to that?
I just want to share just something on the experience of learning that piece. As a musician, you get to play all sorts of works, and you can sort of obviously lean towards one genre over another. And I have always been fascinated by contemporary music and where is it going, and what directions is it going in, and so to get this opportunity to work on this particular piece, Vanity, was it was sort of part of my professional development, I found. And last year the equivalent was working on Brett Dean's Hamlet opera, where it takes quite a long time to tackle the phrases and the rhythms and the melodies, but once you get over that point, and when you do it with other people, it is so rewarding, and the whole group is taken to another realm. And I'm hoping that the listeners, whilst the meaning, the essential meaning of each of those sonnets may not have been sort of manifest all the time, I hope sensations and phrases of Shakespeare's beautiful language came across in new and interesting ways that you will remember, or at least remember that feeling you had. Certainly the choir will be singing this music, I think, and phrases for a while, because it's been so much part of their lives for the last few weeks.
Thank you. I think we can open it up for questions if anyone has any. There are some roaming microphones which will come round to you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for putting on such a wonderful show, because I've never sort of come to anything quite like this. I thought the best that we could expect would be a few dodgy cassettes, but this is really wonderful. So I want to ask a slightly technical question. You Luke, you showed us quite a lot of manuscripts.
Yes.
And which you have consigned to the library, and they're all written in pencil on regular manuscript paper. And would you say that you were unusual in doing that? I mean, are all the pieces that you have consigned to the library like that? Are they all sort of handwritten on old-fashioned music paper? Because, I know that a lot of composers sort of do it all on score writing programs, a bit like word processors for music, like Sibelius or whatever they use now. So are you unusual in that respect?
I think, my process is I write by hand to begin with, and then either myself or my publisher will typeset the music, and then it'll be printed. So what the musicians will get will be something like this. They'll get a regular printed part or score. But I do think it is unusual for composers now to write by hand. It's what my teachers did, and for me as well, it is that kind of tactile engagement with the music itself, the kind of act of putting it with your hand onto the paper and physically making the marks, that is part of the compositional process that, if taken away, there's an important part of the whole journey from head to sound that will be lost. So sometimes by necessity I have to go straight into Sibelius, which is the program I use, but there'll always be a short score or sketches that I will have first, if not time to write the whole thing out by hand first.
Because they looked like fair copies. I mean, they weren't sketches.
The ones that I showed you were fair copies, yeah. Some of the material was sketches, but most of what I had up there were kind of the full thing, yes.
Okay, well, that's very interesting.
Yeah. Some other questions? Oh.
Thanks very much for that. Could you speak a little bit more about your experience writing in and for the Foundling Museum? I mean, it's such a special and melancholy place. How did you approach the very specific history of that place?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was the Foundling Hospital to begin with, and two of its patrons were Handel and Hogarth. So there are lots of Hogarth pictures around in the museum, and there's a big Handel archive. So there's this relationship with music that's been there throughout the organization's history. And Handel actually left his copies of the Messiah to the Foundling Hospital, and it was through then licensing those copies of the Messiah that they funded the Foundling Hospital. But it is quite a sad story, I guess, that it housed children whose mothers couldn't look after them, and sometimes those kids were there for a short period, and sometimes the mothers would come back when they could take them again, or sometimes they were there indefinitely until they grew up. Handel wrote a Foundling Hospital anthem, and so my main project while I was there was to write a Foundling Museum anthem, which I wrote for a local primary school and an early music ensemble. But I spent time in the Handel archive doing research and researching into the kind of stories and the tokens. So the children had a kind of a token that the mother would leave to recognize the child by when she came back. So they're quite moving documents there. Yeah.
A question from the choir, if that's okay, by the audience. I've noticed that in Canberra, over the last few weeks, there's been a plethora of Shakespeare-related performances. I don't know if anybody else has been to any of those concerts, but I don't think you could have fitted them all in if you tried for one person. So I'm wondering whether you can explain what's going on in Canberra, and or have you observed a similar phenomenon in other parts of the world? Is Shakespeare just the hot thing at the moment amongst concert?
It's not something I've observed, Kelly, but I do think that Shakespeare is recurrent in artists' work. I mean, like Tobias mentioned, there's Brett Dean's Hamlet. There are a couple of Shakespeare operas. Verdi wrote one, I think. There's plenty of settings of Shakespeare's text, and there's, for me, just inherent music in the text. So I can see why composers are drawn to setting Shakespeare. But no, whether it's a particular trend now, I can't really speak to that, sorry.
My question is just related to young, specifically Australian composers. Is there something that has really served you a great purpose and that has really helped you start a successful career that you have now? Are there, tips and tricks, really?
I think the thing that's most helpful is kind of the Australian character in being a young Australian composer. I mean, I'm not a young Australian composer anymore, but when I went abroad to study, the lack of deference to authority figures or tradition really helped me kind of carve away. I saw a lot of my British colleagues feeling they had to compose in a certain style to make sure that they would then get the commissions after they studied, whereas I just wasn't aware of it and wasn't really interested in it. And I think other Australians are somewhat similar. That was very different in Germany and in Austria, but in Britain, I think the sense of tradition and the right way to compose is still quite pervasive. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thanks very much for those questions, and thank you to both of you for the conversation. And I was actually thinking about what you were saying, Luke, around Peter Goldsworthy's papers being here too, and it made me think that our collection isn't just living, it's all conversation. It's all of the interactions that go on between artists, not just the artist individually, and that is so rich in this collection. So it's lovely to know that one is here. You're very generous and, personal insights into your work. I just wanted to also talk about tattoo negotiation. Because 22 years ago, I failed to negotiate my then 16-year-old out of her first tattoo. And the point is, she was a cellist. The tattoo is a beautiful little bass clef on her arm. And she said to me, "Mum, when is music ever not going to be important in my life?" And at that point, I'd lost the negotiation. So for all of those, and particularly our youngsters, our young choristers, thanks very much for coming along to the library and delighting us with your song. Older choristers, you've delighted us as well. And thank you to both of our instrumentalists, and to those who keep making music. And may it be that music is always important to us. Thank you, and a round of applause for our performers.